Hi, this is Paula Gloria, and this show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole because we like to go into topics more deeply. Today, I have a special opportunity to go into a topic that's particularly close to my heart, and that is the topic of city planning. And you might say, well, wow, Paul, I didn't know you were interested in city planning. But if you remember, my show is about spirituality and politics, and one of the catchy phrases is mantra and yantra equals tantra. And Tantra is about the science of manifestation. Unfortunately, this Indian spiritual science is often thought of in the West as only something to do with sexuality. Sexuality is a part of it, maybe about like 11%. But there is a vast area of knowledge about manifestation and the science of manifestation that if we understood, we could be more successful in our lives. Now, on my YouTube site, one of my favorite shows was done quite a few years ago, maybe in 2006, when I used to go to the New York Public Library and check out videos and then roll them in and make comments on my weekly call-in show. And one had to do with Robert Moses. And it was talking about how New York City developed and what people thought of in the future, what would be an ideal society. And so I'm very happy to have with me as a guest a professor of the Center for Urban Planning at Rutgers University, and that's Robert Burchell. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah. How did you get interested in city planning?
Well, it's an amusing story. I had been down south for a while and then overseas for a while after undergraduate school, and came back and knew I wanted to go to graduate school. And I was a mechanical engineer, and my father was a civil engineer. And I was going to go into civil engineering like my father. And I went to Rutgers, where I am now a professor, as someone starting graduate school, likely in engineering. And I looked at civil engineering, and there was not one course that I liked in the entire curriculum.
Really?
And the page flipped over from CIV to CIT, which was city planning, and every one of the courses there were something that I really thought that I would enjoy taking. So thank God that that page flipped over, and we now call city planning urban planning, and had it flipped over and it was called urban planning.
You wouldn't
at that
have
time, I would have been in ceramics.
Isn't that
so
interesting?
The interesting thing is that every one of the courses, and that's the way I feel about city planning or urban planning. It's a wonderful profession. It is an ability to constantly do work that you see improve the lives of people and people in their living environments, and people getting services more or increased public services in a more expeditious fashion. It really is very embracing in terms of your undergraduate specialty. So you can have a variety of undergraduate background, sociology, political science, public administration, geography.
You know, as you're speaking, I'm remembering some of the video that I checked out from the library, and it said that you can really tell what a city thinks about its people by how it's planning itself. And it was talking about in the ghettos, the children were having to play in the hot sun with fire hydrants that had sort of burst open, instead of planning a place where little kids can run around in water. So it's also a field of great compassion, and concern for people.
It is, and there's a real life's blood associated with your profession. You really have a feeling that every day that you go to do your profession, and that's also the interesting thing about research. Research is just incredibly hard and incredibly interesting, and that's what we do at the Center for Urban Policy Research. And you never know the outcome, and so that further makes city planning more interesting, because you're faced with something every single day. You're only as good as what you're delivering on that particular day. You have no history that you can carry with you, and you sing for your supper. And so all of that comes through in terms of the profession of city planning, and it's a very, very interesting profession.
That's really something. You know, I think it's good that you started in civil engineering or mechanical engineering as your undergraduate, because I used to take many trips to Egypt and look at all the, the huge ruins there, and it was so precise and it's so baffling, and how did they do this? But it turns out they would watch very simple things, like how the sun was coming up. And if you actually, like I go down to the East River pretty often and watch the sun come up, and it'll come up over a different building over in Brooklyn every day. And so if you pay attention to that, you can actually see where shadows are cast, and you watch with the city and you see how it will reflect against certain windows. And so somebody who's paying attention can sort of get grounded from that practical, very pedestrian observation.
Right. I think that city planning has, again, a number of feeds from undergraduate specialties. And the interesting thing, I think, about engineering, design is a very, very important part of city planning. It has always been. As a matter of fact, in many of the better planning schools, there's always this little bit of friction between, is city planning a design specialty, or is city planning a process that must be better understood and dealt with as a process. But design is very strong. But I think the thing that I take from engineering school is a feeling for numbers, and that was always my specialty within planning. The finances of what makes a city run, and how much does a city cost to run, and when you bring different types of people or you plan for different types of people in a city, does one type of people cost more than another to educate, to provide services?
And you and Jane went over that really well in the show that she did, and I want to study that more before I have you as a guest again. But one thing I'm thinking on this video that I checked out from the library, it said that Robert Moses had access to the tolls that was being charged for the I guess you call them, we call them freeways in California, but you have
the roadways, right?
The road, but when the turnpikes, we don't have that in California. Okay. But at the turnpikes, he would collect fares, and that money then seemed to have been he had access to a huge amount of money, and so the designing was going as a result of that. Do you have any comments about that? Like today, that wouldn't happen. It would be dribbling down through institutions like yours.
I think that the day of Robert Moses type of personality directing solutions that impact people is an era of planning that's past.
Yeah.
And some people would decry that. And some
they
people
say he gutted neighborhoods, and others say he brought us into the...
That's right. And both of those things are right. The great thing about having gray hair is that you understand in any argument there's a certain amount of truth on each side of the argument. Right. And again, that's really true. So the reality of it is we will probably never have another Robert Moses of that type, and that could be good or bad. But as something becomes more of a priority, more of the people come behind it, and then that is the political action that causes it to move. For instance, if the West Side Highway, if movement in New York City became such an impossibility, there would be a movement to make the West Side Highway more than it is right now, and that movement is not there. So it hasn't. It really hasn't been. It really hasn't gone to the type of road that it could be, or the type of road that it would have been with Moses in charge.
Right. Now, when you're saying that era will probably never come back again, I was saying before the show to you that I'm from Berkeley, California. My mom was a law librarian, and she, she'd meet different professors, and, we were exposed to different ideas even when we were young. And there was one man named Erich Jansch who was, he came over, he was an Austrian, and he was doing some kind of work in philosophy, but he was hired by the city planning department. That was the first time I kind of heard of that department hiring such an expanded thinker. And a product of that department also was a book called A Pattern Language, and it's escaping me who wrote it. I think it was a couple authors from the UC City Planning Department. And when I did a show where my brother picked it up, because he and I made some money in cellular telephone, and then we didn't see each other for a number of years. I went off to Cyprus trying to build an eco village, and he built a beautiful house in Lake Tahoe. And we both somehow, architects or some circumstances, both gave us that book. And when we were having this discussion, one of my viewers from Italy saw that book on the table and said that one of the authors was a big computer programmer or designer of programs in computers. So to me, and in that book it said, if the landscape is dominated by more than 10% with roads that accommodate cars, it ceases to be, he didn't use this word, but something like user-friendly. It ceases to be an inviting environment. Is that valuable to have a place like city planning to point these things out?
I think it is, and city planning does. And the interesting thing is that city planning will tell you, for instance, in a rural area, that roads need not be as wide. That in an urban area they need to be so wide to accommodate parking on both sides of the street, and then deliveries, and then traffic flow, and a variety of other kinds of things. So different standards pertain in different locations, but there has to be also a sense of this. And it's interesting that people now from Smart Growth America, which is kind of a different movement, movement away from cookie cutter ordinances and to shaping the city by design and getting back to better design principles, actually will take a state highway and find ways to make that state highway much more friendly by putting a median divider in there, which is beautifully landscaped, or finding ways to make it narrower or wider at various points rather than just a straight highway that goes all the way down, so that you can bring parking into it and allow automobiles to move, but also allow people to look at what surrounds that state highway and catch the beauty of the surroundings of that road.
Another thing I caught from your show with Jane is you were saying that Manhattan is like AAA. People like to live here, so if it's very congested, you shouldn't be emphasizing, as Robert Moses seemed to have been, to get cars to get them out and to build out the suburbs. But is there some way through design that people can essentially enjoy each other more?
Well, I think there is that movement going on right now, and it really would not be necessarily through design, but through design and finance in terms of congestion pricing, so that you could find a way that it would be very, very expensive to bring a car into Manhattan.
I want to reserve that for another show, because Carl Pearson, I'm hoping to have as a guest with you for the next show. He has very strong feelings about that.
Right.
This is where you get back to the science. When I said yantra and mantra are sounds that through traditions of time have been found to be peaceful and harmonizing vibrations that you can repeat or think while you're meditating. But yantras are shapes that also are kind of archetypical patterns of orderliness. When you come up to something like congestion pricing, you can have a lot of reaction on both sides that this is or isn't a good thing to do. And yet, if maybe a Robert Moses would have been the kind of personality that would sort of have a vision and push things through, so you do get something done instead of just sort of spinning around. How do you deal with city planning today?
Well, city planning has gone through 3 phases. The first phase, which is really Robert Moses, is that you plan for people. The second phase is that you...
Excuse me, Robert Moses was planning for people, but he was gutting neighborhoods.
Right.
He was changing
the
ethnic areas.
The idea was that he knew more, and they were part of the process.
Oh, I see. He was planning for people. He was the ultimate...
He was making all the decisions.
He was the authority.
He was making all the decisions.
Right.
Or people around him as part of that department were making all of the decisions. People who lived in the neighborhoods didn't play a role.
Right.
Then the second phase was that you plan with people. People have a reasonably strong influence on what happens in the ultimate plan solution. And then the final phase is that people plan. It's their plan.
Really?
They have bought into it. And that's where we are. That's really where we are right now. And it's a wonderful phase in that the aspirations and the desires of people are now being incorporated into the plans, but there are many voices, and then the questions become which voice do you listen to, which voice has more weight, and all of those kinds of issues. And then how do we get from point A to point B while we're sensitive to these concerns? The professionals have to weigh in, and then that is kind of moved forward, and that becomes the plan.
Right. When you studied city planning, was it a concern of your studies what finances would be available? I mean, say you've got a group of city planners, people who you have a lot of respect for, they've got a terrific idea, but then you must have to go to somebody else and find out if there's money available to do it.
Well, that's always the case, and money plays a big role in everything. Do you have the money to do it, and how creatively can you find ways? Can you budget into the future? Can you take advantage of the worth of current rather than future dollars, and a variety of kinds of approaches to get to the finance issue?
The only thing is, again, going back to the mantra yantra equals tantra, the idea is that if you really get the vibration right, both visually and with, audioly, in meditation there's the transcendence, or a dropping beyond the thinking, leads to profound relaxation in the body, reorganization, and then access to much greater creativity, energy. You see solutions where you didn't before. So what I'm thinking, instead of always thinking that this is something that's going to cost, maybe, to quote a man named John H. Patterson, who started National Cash Register, when he found out cash registers were being returned because they were sabotaged by his workers, he went down and found the conditions of his workers was so bad that he started to implement better working conditions. And he said it doesn't cost, it pays. So can we imagine a type of city planning where we can access the creativity of some of our Manhattan residents that are now being kicked out in the housing courts? They don't have access to get a job, and the landlord understandably wants their rent, and then the city planners, if they're kind of isolated off, as academia can tend to be, they can't really deliver what could be delivered.
That's really the role of academia, if academia is working right, to try to look at a problem that's being encountered in a professional area and try to propose solutions for that. And again, much of our work is in affordable housing, and that affordable housing doesn't happen, and you have to find very, very creative ways for it to happen. Very creative zoning. Allow little flats and allow little workspaces and flats to be
because that's what
combined.
That's what Jane said. I'm a waitress and I want to live in Manhattan. You should be able to do that.
And often you can. By the way, the waitress has a better chance of living in Manhattan on a reduced standard of space than she would if she was a waitress in the suburbs and the only thing available to her were single-family housing.
Yeah.
She wouldn't be able to live there at all.
I know.
I mean,
she'd need a car.
She'd need a car. Have to commute.
Yeah.
Here, there's so many sharing relationships. There's many subletting relationships that enable people really to live.
Exactly, and that's kind of a reflection of the creativity of this area. For example, I get around on a bicycle, and not only do I save on transportation costs, I don't have to go to a gym.
Right.
You know,
right.
And you constantly find in this concentration of people, particularly I'm fortunate to have kind of artistic friends. We work on public access. We help each other, so that you do have that magic happen of concentrated people, so that people are not the problem. They're actually the solution.
Right. And that's what you get when you have a city. And that's the magnificence of New York City.
Right.
That all of that can go on, and all of that spontaneity can happen, and it's really being generated from the bottom. The people themselves are generating that. And if you look at the way people live and the way people occupy space, it's very, very different than living in the suburbs. It's charmingly and importantly different, because people find sharing relationships. People find an ability to help each other.
Right.
That's not necessarily part of the suburban culture.
Yeah.
So it's
right.
Urb has its own meanings and its own importance, and
what is
good things come from that.
Where does the name urban come from? It must be Latin.
It
right?
means center. It really means center and developed and busy. All of those roots are in the name.
What is the most outstanding city planning department in the country? Where do people look for?
Well, there are 4 or 5 that have been at least rated as very, very good. Harvard has a good program. Berkeley has a good program. MIT probably is rated as the #1 program in the country. Rutgers has a good program. It's rated 4 or 5 in the nation. North Carolina has a wonderful program. Might be rated 3 or so in the nation. So those are the places that are very, very good urban planning departments. And a good urban planning department hires faculty. That makes it a good urban planning department. You have your own faculty. You invest in your junior faculty. All of the other activities are subordinate to supporting a growth in your junior faculty. And then that faculty comes along, and that is for urban, and that's a community, and that's where you have this wonderful relationship with your students. They want to come to the campus. They want to come to the classes because there's a great faculty. The faculty just doesn't come in and teach 2 or 3 courses at night and leave. It's a community, and all of the schools that I mentioned has that.
Does the faculty have power to express their concerns when things like the Freddie Mac and the Fannie Mae indicated that there was going to be people buying things that they didn't have jobs to be able to pay, and the government was going to be insuring something that any reasonable person wouldn't have insured?
I think that faculty have incredible freedom. I mean, faculty are outlaws.
Especially if they have tenure, right?
They are bandits in terms of the current situation. They really have an enormous amount of freedom within the.
But are they
the
listened
university. They are if they're creditable. If they're credible. If they are, the definition of an expert is someone whose knowledge is so superior in an area that his or her statements can be taken in a judicial or quasi-judicial setting as truth. Mm-hmm. If faculty move into those kinds of individual qualification, they will be listened to. They will be listened to. So, and that's who they have to be. They have to be experts in their field. And if they're experts in their field, they'll be listened to.
Well, that's very interesting. So were you happy when you got the job at Rutgers?
It was.
I don't want to call it a job because
it was an interesting day. I was there in a convertible on a 100-degree day in the city of Trenton with the man who preceded me as director of the Center for Urban Policy Research. And he said, "I understand you're interested in coming to work for the center." I said, "Yes." And he said, he said, "How much money would you like?" And I said at that point, and this was probably 35 years ago, I said, "Well, I might like somewhere in the order of $16,000, which was a little bit more than assistant professor was paid." And he was in his car like this, and he was sitting, and he became so furious that I asked for $16,000. He said, "How about 10,000?" And I said, "Well, that sounds like a little low." And he's negotiating now. He pushes the car in front of him, and he pushes the car in back. I am so terrified in the car at this particular point, and he's just driving like this. I said, "I'll take it for 12. I'll take it for 12,000."
Wow.
So that was my initiation with being hired for this wonderful seer, really, who worked to sell women's dresses in Bloomingdale's basement. And he knew how to merchandise, and he could sell city planning. And he could put city planning on the map. And he sold it just like a cheap woman's dress. And it was a wonderful experience to work for him.
We've come to the end of our time, and I'm so interested in what you're saying that we can explore it more in the future because you've opened up so many different topics.
Well, I'd love to.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed being with you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me, and thank you for joining me on Farther Down the Rabbit Hole. My name is Paula Gloria, and we have gone into the topic of city planning much more deeply than you usually see, because my show's about spirituality and politics, and I think if people are in a nice environment, there's something, I guess, that centeredness and that of urban and that aliveness, that busyness, the creativity is more likely to come out, and we can just enjoy each other better.
That sounds great.
That's my feeling.
Right.
So what I'm hoping to do now is, can you do a third show with me, or do you
Sure.
have to? Okay.
Sure.
I want to bring Carl Pearson on because I've done about, actually, Carl, we've probably done 15 shows, and he goes more into, he's an attorney. Who started the paralegal field, and he likes to find workaround solutions with difficult challenges. And we're going to have a call-in from a binary economist who's talking about the importance of sharing in technology or capital ownership, that most of our wealth doesn't come from labor, but it comes from capital. And I somehow feel